watercolor? Oh, probably because you've never gotten to play with watercolor. You don't have the idea that kids have. Kids just love watercolor because they're not sweating it out. They don't have to make it look like something. By the way, this white, I'm not even wetting it. It's just here to market to everybody who thinks they need to have white, but you don't need to have white because with watercolor, the paper is white. So I've just wet the watercolor. I'm going to take this brush out of here, which is a round brush. So awesome, fun to use. And I'm going to be painting today with a flat brush, and you probably want to hear what it is. It's called a wash brush, this one. It doesn't have to be called a wash. It could also be called a flat brush, and that's because it's flat across the top. Now today, we are going to just play, and we're going to paint on top of paper towels. So a lot of times I'll talk about go ahead and make a mess. And this gives you a chance to make a mess and not worry about it. So I'm going to load up some paper towels, a couple of layers, and I've even got watercolor paper underneath here, but you could have a plastic trash bag underneath there, just if you don't want it to soak through to the table. And I've got the watercolors now, and I have my two brushes, and we're going to play. And this is something that I do in a class that I teach for at the college, and I teach the class for non-art majors. Now I'm going to do something kind of fun here. You wouldn't have to do it, but I'm so used to doing this, I'm going to do it. I'm going to come over here and see what I have. So in some ways I'm playing right here on the paper. I can also just drip it on from here too. The idea here is to get comfortable with water going different ways, different places, and this is a whole nother thing you could do. I was going to do it totally on the paper towels, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's also fun to do it on a stiff piece of paper. And you see here that water doesn't want to go where it's not wet, and it wants to go where it is wet. Now, without that concept, not only firmly in your mind, but kind of in your experience, and not even kind of in your experience, like in your experience, all right? It's going to always be a little bit freaky doing watercolor because the whole thing will just run together, all right? So here's the fun thing about it, and I'm going to go ahead and complete this piece or start working with it even more so that you get an idea how I can take yellow, for instance, here and combine it with the green, take a little bit of orange and add that to a few things. And you see, as soon as I touch it, did you love that? It just conduits. It just flows into the color I put it in. I'm basically making orange X's just by crossing the line there. Now, it won't run where it's dry, and it obviously will run where it's wet. I can cross here with some green, and there we go. This is called wet on wet, but you know what? You don't have to know what it's called. It might be fun to know what some things are called sometimes, but the whole thing is to experiment. Now, this brush just happens to do something that I like a lot because I like to kind of stamp or touch with my brushes. And I always have. I used to do some really huge pieces on fabric using dye and using foam brushes where I could just touch with my brush like I'm doing here. You could make a whole drawing, a whole painting, just by touching like this and changing up your colors. Just touching. Now, every time that you're touching here and the colors are changing up, you are signaling your brain as to what happens. A lot of people want to take notes. When I've taught color theory classes, people want to take notes and be taking notes while they're changing every color so that they'll know what happens. Well, there's a part of you that you may not be that close to that does make its own notes based on experience. And the thing that it needs is not the notes so that it's always referring to the notes. It needs a lot of experience. That's what it needs, is lots and lots of experience. And the whole idea here of drawing here now is that we load in lots and lots of experience and we keep the stakes very low and play, just play. We're not trying to make, I'm going to go ahead and put my brush down here on my other piece of paper, which is right there. Now it's great to have this here because I can just go ahead and let a lot run just like that and a lot run this way. I don't have as much to run now. And then I can have more run that way. People say to me, I can't draw, I can't even draw a straight line. Well, maybe you could drip a straight line. Maybe you could let your straight lines run and then you could stop them and then you can come back. Now what I'm doing here is I'm leaving a lot of, you might say white, but how am I leaving the white? Well, what's white? Well, the paper's white. And so by leaving a lot of white paper, I have a lot of resist, meaning that the water doesn't want to run into the white paper. And although watercolor is done in many, many layers often, you can get it wet and then it can dry, and then again you might be painting later on top of all of this with it being dry, and then the colored areas are going to resist too until they get wet and become a conduit for the water to run in and the water to move in. Now I have a little pink there and a little purple there. Then we touched in here and it started going down its waterway. So as I bring other colors to colors that are existing, either by mixing them on my brush, I think you can see here that I have red on one side, blue on another side, and then maybe I'll even come in here with green, and then I'll see what that's going to do. And now I'm bringing in red and green, and when I get to the point where I have less water in my brush, it becomes thinner and the red becomes pink. As the red and the gray and the green start to mix, they kind of make a neutral in between them. Now I can let this run more if I want. And this is kind of fun. See how this red that was on one side of my brush is just hanging out there on the edge. I'm trying to get it to jump its line there, trying to get it to move out, both with up in the gravity by making the angle more acute and by hitting it from the back, giving it a little flick. So this is one of the beauties of watercolor now. You can start to see on this watercolor paper, and this is just a pad of watercolor paper. It's actually a 9 by 12 piece of paper, and it's called 140-pound watercolor, which means it's kind of a mid-level watercolor paper. It will start buckling a bit because it's not really thick, but you can always iron it or do some other things to change it back to a flat piece of paper. Okay, now I'm kind of using so much water, actually so much paint in there that you see how it's less transparent because I put so much paint in there. Okay. How would I get some brown over there? I don't know that I need brown over there, but I'm kind of thinking it. I never go into the brown. See all this brown I have? It was not made with the brown. It was made by mixing all the other colors, and then they made brown. So the opposite of blue is going to be orange, and if I bring some orange and some yellow into it and let this guy start playing around and flowing together, ooh, made like a spiral. It will eventually, in just a bit, get a little bit brown or a little bit more multicolored. Won't be quite so much one color. When it's really lots and lots of one color, it's considered to be very saturated. So much of that color. Now, every time I'm touching this, I'm just giving the water a place to go. If it's wet, I'm working it like that. This is ending up being kind of fun. Now, one of the things that you see that I'm doing here is I'm not trying to make a great work of art. I'm doing an investigation. I'm doing a fancy word for it would be research and development. And mostly it's research. It's finding out what can happen. And that's always a fun thing to do. It's something we don't get to do. Most of the things that we're involved in are predetermined these days, and there's not as much play. So this is a lot of play and a lot of watching, and if you get really involved with it, I guarantee you won't really be able to think about anything else while you're doing it.
Going by faith.